Comics knows how to create some absolutely wild stories, whether they are standalone miniseries, whole massive story arcs, or just specific character origins and arcs. They really know how to keep readers engaged. Today on Top 10 Nerd, we're breaking down the top 10 Marvel stories we can't believe happened. Number 10, Wolverine's Snikt. Back in the early 2000s, Marvel made a very interesting foray into manga. It honestly did not go very well for them, but one of the most interesting of the stories to come out of it would have to be Wolverine's Snikt. Japanese manga artist Tsutomu Nihai, sorry if I mispronounced that, created Blame, then this series before moving on to work on Biomega and Knights of Sidonia. His art style is radically different from anything else Marvel has. It's smooth, yet gritty with sharp edges and awesome action. Not to mention, it's kinda creepy. Wolverine is also decidedly quieter in this story. Essentially, the story places Wolverine in a post-apocalyptic world, transported through time by a young girl who is one of the last remaining humans in a world where a virus has mutated into destructive mechanical foes called the Mandate. Now Logan, naturally, is humanity's last hope, since his adamantium claws are the only thing that can destroy the cores inside the Mandate and potentially the one that creates all the rest, the primogenitor. It's not exactly unique in terms of story, but almost everything else about it stands apart from anything else we have seen from Marvel, especially during that time. Number 9, Doom's Revenge. After the beginning of Dark Reign and Dr. Doom being released from prison, he heads home to Latveria, and he eagerly awaits the return of his master, a guy called the Marquis of Death. The Marquis shows up with his mysterious new apprentice in tow and slowly seems to gauge Doom before asking him if he thinks he's been as dangerous as the Marquis trained him to be. Doom says yes, but the Marquis seems to disagree. He thinks that Doom has wasted his opportunity and tries to punish him for it. The next issue is a battle between Doom and the Marquis, but in the end, it turns out that the Marquis is much more powerful than anyone thought and was just messing with Doom's perception of reality, making it so that he believes that it is 5 years in the future and Doom has led all the heroes of the Earth to defeat the Marquis, and now Doom is married to the Invisible Woman and is about to have a child with her. That was all an illusion created by the Marquis just to be cruel to Dr. Doom. He then sets Doom on fire, turns his heart to stone and his blood to acid, and deposits Doom's dying body into a time machine and drops him millions of years ago in the mouth of a megalodon. The Fantastic Four fight with the Marquis for the next 2 issues, finally figuring out a way to defeat the Marquis of Death, and it's at that point that the Marquis' new mysterious apprentice, who I just talked about, reveals himself to be Dr. Doom in disguise this whole time. He's lived 1,000,000 years just to get back to this point in time so that he could gain his revenge, which he does, impressing the Marquis in the process. Number 8, Punisher Max. Punisher Max was an adult comic, and for a guy whose main thing is ushering people to the pearly gates, it does make sense that this setting suits his character best. Removing the Punisher from all the costumes and the superpowers of the regular Marvel universe and dropping him right into an America facing the early days of the War on Terror, it kicked off with the CIA trying to recruit Frank, which sets off a violent political game. This Frank Castle was a veteran of the Cold War, running Black Ops alongside Nick Fury in Vietnam, and he is not someone you want to mess around with. He soft deletes microchip during the very first storyline just for helping the CIA to even find him. His enemies here are also much more threatening and scarily realistic compared to anything that Earth 616 has thrown at the Punisher, with a big shout out to Barracuda, another former soldier just as ruthless and skilled as Frank is. Punisher Max shows the very real physical and emotional damage that Frank Castle's crusade would actually cause him in real life, obviously with a tiny suspension of disbelief that comes with it being a comic book. If you choose to give it a read though, just be warned, it is extremely graphic. Number 7, X-23's origin. X-23's origin story was told in the 2004 miniseries X-23 Innocence Lost, which takes Laura Kinney from conception to independence, and man does she go through the ringer. Laura, unlike most of the other mutants, was created in a lab. This lab was called the Facility, and it's where attempts were being made to clone Wolverine/Weapon X from a recovered sample of his DNA. The problem is that the sample was incomplete, resulting in constant failures. It was the work of brilliant geneticist Sarah Kinney that finally made the project a success when she combined her own DNA with that of the sample to create a genetic replica with near identical powers to the original Wolverine. This clone became labeled X-23, but Sarah secretly named her Laura. X-23 was trained from birth to be an assassin, treated fairly extremely and exposed to a trigger scent that would cause her to lose all control and give in to a brutal rage. The organization used this trigger scent to have her wipe out her sensei, as well as to make money off of her as an 11-year-old super assassin. Eventually, her mother realized that she needed to free Laura. She also learned that the facility has created more clones, intending to train them in the same way, and she decides that she has to take them out. Thanks to Sarah, X-23 manages to destroy the facility and the clones, but as she escapes, she discovers that the facility have put the trigger scent on her mom. Sarah ends up being taken out by Laura herself, passing away in her arms before X-23 finally escapes. Number 6. The Reigning. After the passing of Odin at the hands of Surtur during Dan Jurgens' 1998 to 2004 run on Thor, Thor ends up becoming king of Asgard, and, well, Thor ends up being a pretty bad king. He is harsh, lacks patience, and he makes some really questionable choices with the Odin force power that he now wields. Choices like going off fighting frost giants, getting together with Amora the Enchantress of all people, and in a really odd move, Thor decides that Asgard should invade Earth. Thor uses the resources at Asgard's command to try and forcibly solve all of Earth's problems. Instead of trying to lead humans to be better, he just solves our problems, and while there is a lot of good done by that, a lot of people are resistant to this. A coalition of different countries stage an attack against Asgard, destroying both it and New York City, pushing Thor even further into becoming a sort of dictator. He failed the Koran Kata, which is the test of character put in place by the Council of Godheads, and if that weren't enough, Thor eventually becomes unworthy of Mjolnir when he takes the life of Jake Olsen. He gains religious followers, makes enemies of his friends, and fights and imprisons other Avengers, but he does indeed become the ruler of Earth over the next 200 years, only to reverse it all when he realized how he was still a failure in the eyes of his new son. Number 5. DC vs. Marvel. The 90s were a rough time for comics in general, but especially with DC and Marvel. To help fight flagging sales, the company staged a crossover that saw their universes get all mashed together. The 1996 series called simply DC vs. Marvel did exactly what it claimed to do. Heroes and villains across both universes ended up facing off. Storm faced off against Wonder Woman, Superman fought the Hulk, and for whatever reason, Robin faced Jubilee. I don't know. DC vs. Marvel was a shameless fan service, and no one cared because it was awesome. Sure, it wasn't particularly that well written or drawn, but whatever. All the outcomes of each match were decided by fans, which resulted in some kind of very strange victories, I'm gonna be honest. The notable thing about DC vs. Marvel is how singular it is in history. A crossover like it hadn't happened before, and it probably will never happen again. But I, for one, am just glad it happened at all. And now those comics exist forever for everyone to enjoy whenever they want. Number 4. Time Runs Out, or the Incursions. So, during Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, these things called incursions started to happen, orchestrated by the Beyonders. Essentially, two multiverses would crash together, destroying them both, and the focal point for that crash was the Earth itself. When the incursions started to threaten the multiverse, Namor the Submariner had a different view from the rest of the Illuminati, and during the incursion with Earth 4290001, Namor destroyed that Earth to save both universes and save his own Earth. When the next incursion presented itself right after, the Illuminati were going to just let it happen instead of destroying an entire planet. Standing against that, Namor teamed up with Maximus the Mad of the Inhumans, and then together they freed the prisoners of the Illuminati, which included the Black Order and Thanos, plus some insanely powerful additions. And they are very powerful. This group of villainous powerhouses were sanctioned by the United Nations to destroy the alternate Earths that appeared during incursions. Now, while Namor had planned to use an explosion to destroy the other Earth, Thanos, who pretty much took control of the group, led them in what was basically a complete and utter slaughter. And ultimately, that was for nothing because the incursions happened anyways, pretty much ending this version of the multiverse and bringing us the new Secret Wars. Number 3. Original Sin. Jason Aaron's Original Sin has a rather simple start. It begins with a murder investigation, and then it just throws everything under the sun at the heroes, making a huge splash. The inciting passing of Original Sin is Uatu the Watcher, an incredibly shocking character to be unceremoniously wiped out. Now, various teams of heroes try to search for the culprit, and they uncover some pretty shocking truths, but most of those truths have very little to do with Uatu's death. Uatu's name of the Watcher is literal. He sits up on the moon and just watches everything throughout time. Uatu's eyes contain all the knowledge in the world, and that was what he was taken off the plane for. Uatu's eyes are stolen after his passing, and that results in pretty much everyone's secrets coming out and chaos just reigning. Thor loses the worthiness to wield his hammer, Professor X's will was discovered, and that's just the beginning. By the end of the story, it's revealed that a much older version of Nick Fury was behind all the madness. He wiped out Uatu for the knowledge of his eyes, and he has been secretly pulling strings in the universe for years, using life model decoys of himself to appear to the heroes as a much younger man. Number 2, the Eternal Max. Okay, so this comic is just weird. Most of the comics today have been weird, but trust me. So being a Marvel Max comic, we have to 1. Forget everything we know about the main Marvel universe, and 2. Be prepared for a lot of graphic scenes with a lot of nudity. Essentially, the Eternal Max follows the Eternals, but other than being the immortal servants of the Celestials, these guys are quite different. Taking place just before the dawn of mankind, the Eternals had been serving the Celestials for thousands of years, traveling from planet to planet to mine its resources. When the Eternals arrive on a planet, they genetically modify some of the local intelligent life into artificial Eternals, which they call deviants, and they use them as manual labor to make the job easier. When they arrive on Earth, they do the same thing, turning the proto-humans into deviants, but these deviants are shockingly similar to these Eternals. Now, in the past, the Celestials wiped out every single one of the female Eternals in order to force the male Eternals into servitude. So, when these new deviants were created, the male Eternals get all googly-eyed for the female deviants. A large number of the Eternals go against the rules to teach the deviants how to communicate, and they begin to procreate with them. This leads to essentially a mini civil war among the Eternals between their leader, Ikedan, and the second in command, Karasis. It all leads into the Eternals and these deviants basically becoming the first real humans on Earth. At least that's how I interpret it. If you're over the age of 18, give it a read and interpret it yourself. Number 1, Ultimate Universe Apocalypse. Apocalypse in the Ultimate Universe is actually quite strange. When Apocalypse first showed up here, he was actually a vision or apparition who would only be seen by the schizophrenic Mr. Sinister. This Lord Apocalypse that seemed to live only inside Sinister's head and as a stuffed effigy apparently made Sinister his herald and gave Sinister a mission to take the lives of 10 innocent mutants in order to bring about Apocalypse's manifestation. Now, Sinister managed to accomplish a lot of these on his own, but he finished off the rest when he launched an attack on the Morlocks in their own home, which is when the X-Men arrived. As his final offering to Apocalypse, Sinister took the life of Angel, even though the X-Men tried their best to stop this. Having completed his mission, Sinister then just rose up into the air and then up to the surface of New York, where he physically transformed into Apocalypse himself. Turns out, he was not crazy at all. Not by a long shot, as Apocalypse proved more than capable of taking on the X-Men and the Morlocks with his ability to steal other mutant powers and disable them. He ripped the arm off of Wolverine and caused the mutants in the city to all begin attacking each other. The Fantastic Four showed up but were attacked by the controlled X-Men, and eventually, thanks to a carefully thought out plan by Cable and Bishop, plus some intervention by Jean Grey as the Phoenix Force, a complete catastrophe was avoided and Apocalypse was defeated. And that's all I got. I'm Adam Andrews, this is Top 10 Nerd, thank you so much for watching, I'll catch you on the Flippy Flop, peace out nerds!